Hello friends. Did you know nearly more than 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Who has ever taken a Greyhound at 1:45 in the morning knows a certain type of loneliness that seeps into your bones, the kind that makes your own heartbeat echo in your skull and your thoughts feel heavier than air. I had learned this lesson in the bitter cold of November 2014, making a trip from Cleveland, Ohio to rural Vermont, chasing a job that promised redemption after my engagement had imploded in spectacular fashion 3 months before what should have been my wedding day. I was 27 according to my license, yet felt like a relic of my own life, dragging a single-wheeled suitcase that rattled against the bus floor. My backpack, stuffed with notebooks and a laptop, smelled faintly of coffee and exhaustion. The bus station smelled of diesel fumes and the ghost of stale sandwiches, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a sickly green glow that made everyone look like they were recovering from some unseen tragedy. The driver didn't even glance at my ticket. He waved me toward the back, where the lights flickered and the seats leaned in silent judgment. I picked a window seat about 3 rows from the rear, pressed my forehead against the cold glass, and watched Cleveland's skyline vanish behind us, a blur of neon reflections against the rain-slicked roads. The world outside was empty and indifferent, the freeway stretching like a black ribbon into the night. She boarded at Akron right around 3:10 a.m. I noticed her immediately. There was a deliberate slowness to her movements, like someone who had mastered patience over decades, someone who wanted you to notice. She was in her late 60s, silver hair pulled into a tight bun, pale gray eyes that reflected the fluorescent lights in a way that almost seemed unnatural. She wore a wool cardigan, faded to the color of wilted tulips, and carried a wicker basket covered with a faded checkered cloth, the kind you imagine in old postcards of New England autumns. When she stopped in my row and smiled, I instinctively pulled my bag from the empty seat next to me, a polite gesture drilled into me from childhood. She settled beside me with a soft sigh, arranging her basket on her lap like a ritual. Her smile was warm but rehearsed, a practiced kindness that made my skin crawl just slightly. "My name is Margaret," she said within the first few minutes, introducing herself as if we were old friends. She was headed to Montpelier, Vermont, to visit her grandson for his birthday. Her voice was calm and measured, the kind of voice you could imagine reading bedtime stories to children. But somehow, in the hollow hum of a Greyhound bus at 3 in the morning, it sounded different. She asked questions, not the casual, passing type, but slow, deliberate inquiries that seemed designed to coax you into revealing yourself completely. Where was I going? Why had I chosen this path? Was I alone? I found myself answering, spilling details about the job interview at a small publishing firm, the email that had seemed like a lifeline, the tiny Vermont town where I hoped to start over. She listened, head tilted slightly, humming softly at the right moments. There was a rhythm to talking to her, the hum of the engine beneath us, the occasional headlights from passing trucks, illuminating her pale face in flickering bursts. At one point, she patted my hand, saying that I seemed such a determined young woman, and that good things were coming my way. I felt a strange blend of comfort and unease, like staring at the sun with half-closed eyes. About an hour into the ride, Margaret lifted the checkered cloth from her basket, revealing rows of pastries wrapped in wax paper. Each one was golden, glazed with something sticky and sweet. She said she had baked them for her grandson, but always made too many. and laughed at her own joke with a sound too delicate for someone of her age. Before I could refuse, she pressed one into my hand, insisting that a young traveler at this hour needed a little something to sustain her. The pastry was warm, almost impossibly so. I should have thought it strange that it had stayed this way for over an hour, but hunger and fatigue overrode caution. I bit into it, tasting honey and almonds, with a faint, bitter floral note I couldn't place. She watched me intently, the kind of look that lasts slightly too long before relaxing into the same grandmotherly smile. About 20 minutes later, the first wave hit me. A soft heaviness started behind my eyes, spreading down into my skull and body like warm syrup. I assumed it was exhaustion catching up, the emotional and physical toll of sleepless nights over ruined wedding plans and mounting debt. My limbs felt alien, as if borrowed for the night, and the window against my temple pulsed with the bus's vibrations. Passing headlights became streaks across my vision. Like comets in slow motion, I tried to sit upright. My body didn't respond. Margaret's voice reached me through a fog, asking if I wanted to rest. Her hand guided me gently down, and my head rested against the seat back. The last thing I saw clearly was her face hovering above me, her eyes sharp now, like a predator observing weakness. I drifted into a half-conscious state, aware yet unable to act. Fragments of sound reached me, the rumble of the engine, coughs behind us, and beneath it all, Margaret's low murmuring. She wasn't speaking to me anymore. She was speaking to someone else. I cracked my eyes open slightly and saw her leaning toward the aisle, whispering to the driver, who had stepped out of his seat. The bus had stopped, though I remembered nothing. Words reached me, disjointed, meaningless at first. Then a single phrase froze me. "Exit 59 Service Road." The driver's eyes flicked toward me briefly, not checking on me, assessing my unconsciousness. Panic struck, but my body remained limp, unresponsive to reason. The bus lurched forward again, the rhythmic hum gone, replaced by uneven bumps and the oppressive darkness outside. Streetlights vanished. Passing trucks were gone. Only black. Margaret hummed beside me, a lullaby or incantation I couldn't tell, hypnotic and horrifying. I forced my pinky finger to twitch, a small sign of life. Enough. The bus turned onto a cracked, abandoned service road. A sprawling, dark warehouse came into view. Shadows moved near the loading docks. Margaret leaned close, whispering reassurance, her breath sweet and sour, peppermint mixed with rot. Then clarity hit me. This wasn't a random stop. She had done this before, selecting vulnerable women alone at night, delivering them somewhere, to someone. I wasn't a passenger. I was cargo. The bus stopped. Silence. Margaret stood, smoothing her cardigan, leaving the basket behind like a prop. Voices outside. At least 2 men. My chance. Survival instinct surged. I pushed myself upright, grabbing my purse wedged under the seat. My hands fumbled for the emergency window latch, a red handle I had read about somewhere, and pulled. The window popped open. I didn't hesitate. Head first, I tumbled into the frozen November night. Gravel scraped my palms. Pain lanced through my shoulder and hip. Footsteps shouted behind me. I scrambled into the weeds, thick stalks scratching, thorny branches tearing. Adrenaline carried me through the syrupy heaviness in my limbs. I reached tree cover, forced myself upright, and ran. Blindly. Branches lashed my face, roots tangled my ankles. Shouts receded, lost in the distance. How far? How long? I couldn't measure it. Only heartbeats and ragged breaths. Eventually, a paved road appeared, faint yellow lines down the center. Lights, a gas station. Salvation. A young attendant, Derek, confirmed reality 3 times before I believed it. I collapsed against the ice machine, shaking, covered in dirt and dried blood from scratches I didn't remember. Police arrived. I described the route, the warehouse, the bus. When we returned, the site was empty. Margaret, the driver, the basket, gone. Only tire tracks and a checkered cloth remained. Toxicology later revealed traces of sedatives. No one was ever caught. Margaret, if that was her real name, vanished. The bus company had no record of that driver. I moved back with my mother, took a quiet bookstore job, and rebuilt slowly. I haven't taken a bus since, and every time I see a gray-haired woman with a basket and a practiced smile, I cross the street. Some lessons cost almost everything. Some mistakes follow you forever. And that night, I learned what desperation and misplaced trust could truly cost. My mom had barely turned the corner when the silence of the house settled around me like a thick blanket. It was a chilly Saturday in early November, Michigan cold, the kind that creeps into your bones even when the heaters are running. She had left just a minute earlier, her old Honda rumbling down our cracked driveway toward I-94, heading to pick up my uncle from the airport in Cleveland. It was the first time she'd trusted me to stay home alone for this long. I was 14, technically a high schooler, but still treated like a kid most days. Today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be proof that I could handle myself. Our rented house sat on the edge of Walnut Creek Township, outside Ann Arbor, a dull beige single-story place with aluminum siding and windows that whistled with every gust of wind. The landlord didn't fix anything unless it was literally falling apart. And in our house, that was mostly everything. The appliance that terrified us the most? Our microwave, a bulky, yellowing box from the late 90s, something that should have been sitting in a scrapyard, not heating food. The inside walls were scarred with black burn marks. The rotating glass plate had a crack that made a grinding noise each time it spun. And worst of all, it sparked. The first time I saw it spark, I thought my heart was going to explode. I told Mom right away, and she told the landlord. But he shrugged and said, if it still worked, he wasn't replacing anything. Mom warned me again and again, use the oven instead. I don't care if it takes longer. Please just don't use that microwave. And I really meant to listen. Really. But as soon as her car disappeared, my stomach growled like a wild animal. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I knew exactly what I wanted. The pepperoni pizza pockets in the freezer. I tugged open the freezer door and grabbed the box. The cardboard was frosted and soft. The cooking instructions were right there. Oven. 425 degrees Fahrenheit. 20 minutes. Microwave. 2 minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity. 2 minutes felt like heaven. I argued with myself for maybe 10 seconds. I remembered the sparks. I remembered the warnings. Then hunger took over, and stupidity held its hand. I tore open the box, tossed 2 pockets onto a plastic plate, should have taken that as a bad sign, and popped them into the microwave. I hit 2 o'clock on the keypad, heard the familiar hum, and leaned back against the counter scrolling through my phone. At first, everything seemed fine. Then, a loud crack sounded from inside the microwave. My head snapped up. A thin streak of blue electricity danced along the back corner, flickering like lightning trapped behind the glass. I froze. My thumb hovered over the cancel button, but I convinced myself it would stop. It always stops. It's fine. It'll be fine. The worst lie I've ever told myself. Another spark. Then a sound like oil hitting a boiling skillet. Suddenly, fire. A small flame curled up from beneath the pizza pockets, licking at the plastic plate. The plastic shriveled, turning black and bubbling. My heart thudded loudly in my ears, but my body didn't move. I just watched in disbelief. Smoke boiled out from the edges of the door. That smell. Burnt plastic and electrical death. It clawed at my throat. I slammed the cancel button and yanked the door open. Whoosh! The fire leapt out, oxygen feeding it like gasoline. Flames clung to the melting plate, dripping like lava onto the cheap laminate countertop. The paper mail we had stacked next to the microwave instantly ignited, envelopes turning into bright scraps of fire. I panicked, frozen and shaking. The alarms hadn't even gone off yet. I could have run. I could have called 911. I could have done anything smart. Instead, I grabbed a dish towel and started smacking the fire like a complete idiot. The towel turned into a torch. I screamed and dropped it. Flames skittering across the vinyl floor tiles. Smoke finally filled the room thick enough to trigger the alarm, its shrill beeping drilling into my skull. My lungs burned. My eyes stung. The fire climbed the curtains. Within seconds, the entire counter was a wall of fire. I stumbled backward, heart slamming in my chest. Water. I needed water. I grabbed the biggest pot we owned, a dented silver one Mom used for Sunday stew, shoved it under the faucet, and turned it on full blast. But water is slow. Fire is not. The heat behind me became unbearable, like an oven door left open too long. I tossed the first pot full of water. Steam erupted, but the flames only hissed and grew angrier. I filled it again, and again, and again. Barely any change. Smoke dropped lower, a choking gray blanket swallowing the kitchen. Every breath felt like inhaling knives. I was dizzy and coughing so violently I thought my chest would crack. A window shattered behind me, the fire flooding upward as cold outside air fed its hunger. Flames crawled along the ceiling like demonic vines. That's when it hit me. If I didn't run, I was going to die. I bolted for the back door, hip crashing into a chair hard enough to send pain shooting up my spine. My shaking hands fumbled with the lock, slipping, then finally turning. I kicked the door open and burst into the backyard, collapsing onto frozen dirt and dead grass. The cold stole my breath, but it was better than smoke. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the sky through watery eyes, coughing up black phlegm. The house, my home, was burning behind me. I heard shouting. At first it sounded distant and warped, like underwater noise. Then a figure ran toward me. Mr. Briggs, our neighbor, still in his pajama pants and slippers, a retired Marine who spent most days working on rusty cars in his driveway. He knelt beside me, gripping my shoulders. "Kid, are you okay? Is anyone else inside?" I tried to answer, but all that came out was a horrible wheeze. He didn't wait. He sprinted back toward his house to call 911. I laid there helpless, shivering, watching flames burst through the kitchen windows, climbing toward the roof. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint at first, then louder, then everywhere. Fire trucks screeched onto our street, firefighters in heavy gear rushing out, dragging hoses, shouting to one another. Water blasted against the burning house, steam clouding the air. Our other neighbors, the Keller family, stood outside, terrified, shoving their trash cans away from the fence as burning embers floated toward them like fireflies from hell. I caught sight of their little girl clinging to her mom's leg, crying. My stomach twisted. I could have killed them, because I couldn't wait 20 stupid minutes. A firefighter wrapped me in a thick blanket, rough wool scratching my cheeks, and gently guided me to the curb. Someone checked my pulse. Someone else shined a light into my smoke-stung eyes. I stared at the house through blurry tears. The place where I slept, where Mom made pancakes every Saturday, where family photos hung crooked on the wall. It was disappearing, collapsing into a heap of flame and steam. And it was all my fault. Mom's car screeched into the neighborhood, tires screaming, brakes squealing as she stopped in the middle of the street. She jumped out before the car even finished rolling. I braced myself for rage, for disappointment, for judgment. But she didn't yell. She dropped to her knees in front of me and pulled me into her arms, hugging me so tight my ribs hurt. "You're alive. You're alive. Thank God you're alive." She repeated it like a prayer, and I sobbed harder than ever, choking out apologies, each one smaller and more broken than the last. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. The microwave. The fire. I tried. She cupped my face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Houses can be rebuilt. You can't." Those words burned deeper than any flame. We lost almost everything. The roof collapsed. The smoke ruined everything the flames didn't. Insurance helped, but it didn't cover memories. We moved into a cramped apartment on the other side of town. Mom worked extra shifts. I slept on a pull-out couch for nearly a year. Mr. Briggs came by often, making sure I was okay. The Kellers never blamed me, even though they had every right to. They invited us to dinner once a week, making sure we didn't feel alone. We rebuilt. Slowly. Painfully. I'm 25 now, living back in Ann Arbor, not far from that street. And ironically, I became a fire safety technician. People laugh when I tell them that, until they hear why. Even now, microwaves make me uneasy. I never leave one running unattended. If I see sparks, I unplug first, ask questions later. And if I smell plastic burning, my chest tightens, my eyes water, and I have to remind myself, I survived. But I came close to not surviving. That day taught me the lesson most people learn too late. Hiding a mistake can cost lives. Asking for help can save them. I would rather be yelled at, grounded, embarrassed, anything, than see another home, or another life, swallowed by fire. So if you're listening to this, hear me clearly. No mistake is worth dying over. If something is wrong, call for help. Right then. Right there. No hesitation. Fire doesn't wait. Neither should you. Driving for a rideshare app was supposed to be temporary, a means to cover student loans while my career decided what it wanted to be. By the fall of 2018, I had been out of college for 3 years. My marketing degree sat untouched on a shelf, while my nights were filled with picking up people who were drunk, tired, or just plain reckless. The money was decent, the hours flexible, but the stories I collected along the way were starting to haunt me in ways I hadn't anticipated. That particular Friday night began like any other. I logged in at 9 p.m., hoping to catch a crowd leaving the downtown bars. For the first few hours, everything was normal. Quick downtown runs, people heading to concerts or late-night diners. Around midnight, I stopped at a convenience store off Highway 22 in northeastern Ohio, sipping a coffee and scrolling through the app while the parking lot lights flickered over the asphalt. The app had been slow for 20 minutes, and I debated calling it a night early. Then the ping came. The pickup was on Millbrook Road, 15 miles out of town, where the lights ended and farmland took over. The passenger's rating was a mediocre 4.1, which made me hesitate. The destination was listed only as gas station, vague enough to make my gut clench. Every instinct screamed to decline. But rideshare apps punish drivers who decline too often, and I had already skipped 2 rides that night. I pressed accept and started driving into the darkness that made my headlights feel like candles against an ocean of black. The road narrowed and the cornfields pressed in on both sides. The GPS insisted I continue straight, and I tried to focus on the monotony of the road. After about 20 minutes, I spotted him, a man standing by a dark sedan with hazard lights blinking. The headlights revealed a face ordinary in every way, a face I would forget if I weren't staring at it now. He introduced himself as Marcus, mid-40s, graying hair, flannel shirt, and worn boots. His smile was too perfect, too rehearsed, like something he had practiced in a mirror. He explained that he'd hit something on the road, a flat tire, no spare, and a dying phone battery. He needed a ride to the nearest gas station. It made sense. People get stranded all the time. But my chest tightened as he kept glancing back at his car, making sure it was still there. He slid into the back seat, and I noticed the smell immediately. Not gas, exactly, but coppery, metallic under a stronger scent of musk. I forced myself to concentrate on the road, keeping the conversation minimal, confirming his destination, a gas station about 12 miles east. For the first few minutes, Marcus didn't speak much. He stared out the window, tapping his fingers on his knee. When I tried small talk, he gave vague answers about visiting a friend on a nearby farm. Then, about 5 minutes into the drive, he asked if we could change the destination. His new location was in Ridgely, a small town 30 miles in the opposite direction. He said a friend would pick him up there, and it would be easier than a tow truck. My instincts screamed, but the thought of more money for the longer fare pushed me to agree. We turned onto County Road 17. The trees pressed in close on either side, dark and suffocating. His phone lit up occasionally, though he claimed it was nearly dead. Each flash illuminated knuckles darkened with something I couldn't place. Blood? Dirt? Oil? He caught my glance in the rearview mirror and smiled that same rehearsed smile. "Everything okay?" he asked. My voice cracked as I lied about watching for deer. The deeper we went, the harder it became to ignore the unease crawling up my spine. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, my ears straining for every sound. And then my phone buzzed. A news alert. My foot lifted slightly off the gas without realizing it. Local news reported a domestic disturbance on Franklin Farm Road, just 3 miles from where I picked him up. A woman had called 911, but the line disconnected mid-call. Officers found signs of a struggle. No suspect identified. Every hair on my body stood on end. Franklin Farm Road. Marcus had said he was visiting a friend nearby, but I now realized he had been lying. He wanted me to drive him in the opposite direction, away from the scene. My rational mind tried to reason it away, but fear had already taken control. We continued in tense silence. I scanned his hands again, the faint metallic sheen still visible. My mind raced. I couldn't stop the car. I couldn't call 911 openly. I could barely breathe without him noticing. My chest tightened. My stomach churned. Finally, I remembered a truck stop I had visited on slow nights. Big Tom's truck stop, open 24/7. A haven of bright fluorescent lights and constant movement. If I could reach it, I would be surrounded by witnesses. I told him my tank was low, that I needed to stop for gas. He hesitated for a second, then shrugged. "Sure," he said, like it was no concern. The next 15 minutes were an eternity. Every shift, every cough, every small sound in the back seat made my heart pound faster. The lights of Big Tom's appeared through the trees. Relief surged like electricity. I parked under the brightest light, right next to the entrance, and moved quickly toward the building without looking back. Inside, I asked to use the store phone and called 911, explaining everything. The pickup location, his behavior, the change of destination, the stains on his hands. The dispatcher assured me officers were on the way. Through the window, I saw my car. Marcus was gone. The door swung open, empty, I scanned the parking lot, but he had vanished, like smoke dissipating into the night. 12 minutes later, police arrived. I gave my statement, including every detail. One officer returned with a serious look. He told me the domestic disturbance had turned deadly. Constance Rayner, 39, found dead in her kitchen. The suspect, Marcus Rayner, her estranged husband. I recognized his face immediately from the driver's license photo. My passenger, the man I had almost driven 30 miles away, was a murderer. Police later discovered his car abandoned on Millbrook Road, a hunting knife and Constance's belongings in the trunk. Marcus had been using my ride to escape the area, to distance himself from what he had done. They caught him 3 days later at a bus station in New Jersey, attempting to flee the state. He was convicted and sentenced to 25 years. I quit driving for the rideshare app that week. Took a warehouse job instead. Lower pay, but safety intact. Sometimes I think about that night, about how close I came to unknowingly aiding a killer, about how ordinary faces can hide extraordinary darkness. And I remember that sometimes the only thing standing between life and death is a gut feeling and the courage to act on it. Every time I get into a car with a stranger, even for a quick ride, I remember that October night on Millbrook Road, and I trust my instincts, no matter the cost. Friday evening felt heavier than usual that week, and not in a good way. Both my parents had called within minutes of each other to explain they'd be stuck late at work. Dad had an unexpected inventory issue at the shipping warehouse, and Mom was covering a nurse's shift at the hospital after a co-worker called out sick. That left me in charge for dinner, just me and my younger siblings. I was 16 years old, finally given a chance to handle a real responsibility. My younger brother, Ryder, had just turned 13 last month and would be home from basketball practice around 5:30. My older sister, Morgan, was already holed up in her room, headphones in, clearly detached from the world. I wanted to make something impressive, something that would make my parents proud and prove I was capable. Mom had been teaching me her garlic lemon chicken stir-fry recipe over the past few weeks, and this felt like my moment to shine. Our home was tucked in a quiet neighborhood in Asheville, North Carolina, one of those places where families had lived for decades, and everyone knew each other's names. The kitchen was modest, but efficient, every inch designed for purpose. Wooden spoons in the ceramic jar next to the stove, knives magnetically aligned on the wall, cutting boards stacked in the cabinet under the island. I pulled up the recipe on my phone, gathering ingredients. Chicken breasts from the fridge, colorful vegetables from the crisper, garlic and ginger, rice cooker ready on the counter. I tied on the green apron with faint coffee stains, the one Dad jokingly called vintage, and felt a surge of pride. For a moment, everything felt simple, even comforting. I had no idea that in less than an hour, pride would twist into fear, and that night would burn itself into my memory forever. The first mistake came from rushing. Ryder texted early from practice, saying he would be home in 20 minutes instead of 45. I wanted everything ready when he walked in, wanted him to see me as competent and in control. Instead of carefully prepping, I cut corners. The cutting board hadn't been sanitized. The countertop might have had crumbs from yesterday. Yet I tossed the chicken on it without thinking. My hands moved quickly, a chaotic dance of chopping, stirring, and juggling bowls, all while the wok heated on the stove. The measuring cup I grabbed was old, a Pyrex relic with red measurement lines that always felt indestructible, until it wasn't. I needed it to mix soy sauce, lemon juice, and sesame oil for the sauce. When I set it down too forcefully, I heard a faint ping. My first thought, nothing. No cracks, no chips. Or so I hoped. I poured the sauce ingredients together, then lifted the cup and noticed a thin shard of glass, barely half an inch long, sitting at the bottom of the dark mixture. Panic struck. I fished it out, cutting my thumb slightly in the process, and stared at the tiny fragment. What if there were more pieces hiding, invisible to the eye? I held the cup up to the light, turning it in every direction, searching. The sauce looked dark, almost opaque, impossible to be sure. Logic whispered that I should throw it all away, restart, and take the extra 5 minutes it would take. But Ryder would be home any second, and Morgan would eventually come down expecting food. My pride screamed, "Don't ruin this. It's perfect so far." I made the choice I would regret. I used the sauce anyway. Cooking continued smoothly, almost mocking me for my earlier panic. The chicken sizzled to golden perfection. Vegetables retained their crunch and vibrant colors. The sauce glazed over everything with a tantalizing aroma of garlic, ginger, and lemon. I transferred it to the large serving bowl just as the front door opened. Ryder called out, sniffing the air. "Whoa, something smells amazing." Morgan appeared seconds later, taking out her headphones for once, drawn by the scent. Both stood in the kitchen doorway, and my chest swelled with pride, threatening to drown out the anxiety gnawing at me. I served their plates carefully. Rice on one side, stir-fry heaped on the other. We sat at the table, and every bite they took made my stomach twist. I could not stop imagining shards of glass slicing through them internally, unseen and silent. Ryder ate quickly, barely chewing, rattling on about basketball, while Morgan ate slowly, scrolling through her phone. Every movement made me flinch. My rational mind told me it was probably fine. One tiny chip couldn't have contaminated the batch, but my fear was relentless. I told Ryder I had snacked while cooking, a half-truth to cover my inability to eat, and Morgan barely looked up from her phone. The minutes stretched endlessly, each second filled with dread. I wanted to shout, to tell them to stop eating, to warn them, but I couldn't. Admitting my mistake meant facing the reality that I had risked their safety for pride, for speed. Shame pressed down like a heavy weight, making it hard to breathe. The meal ended without incident. Ryder scraped his plate clean, asking if there was more. I lied, saying no. Morgan finished shortly after, carrying her plate to the sink, thanking me casually before heading back upstairs. I started cleaning, moving mechanically, rinsing dishes, wiping counters, all while replaying worst-case scenarios in my head. Medical shows Mom liked to watch flooded my thoughts. Patients with internal bleeding from invisible cuts, fragments of glass lodged in soft tissue, complications arising silently. I threw away the remaining stir-fry in the measuring cup, wrapping everything carefully in paper towels and newspaper to prevent injury, destroying evidence as if I were a criminal hiding a crime. Text from Mom arrived around 8:30 p.m. "We'll be home around 9:30. How's dinner?" I lied. Turned out great. Everyone loved it. Each word felt like betrayal. The tension in the house was suffocating. I sat in the living room with Ryder, pretending to watch his show while my eyes constantly flicked toward him, scanning for signs of distress. Upstairs, Morgan remained quiet, her silence magnified in my fear-addled mind. At 8:45, Ryder groaned, claiming his stomach felt weird. My chest clenched. I asked him what kind of weird, trying to remain calm. He shrugged, burped loudly, and laughed. Completely fine. Relief surged through me, but my heart didn't settle. Each laugh felt like a countdown that could have ended in tragedy. Mom and Dad arrived just after 9 o'clock, exhausted but cheerful. They praised me for stepping up. Mom hugged me, saying she was proud. Dad joked that maybe I could take over dinner permanently. I smiled, feeling like the worst person alive. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, listening for every sound from Ryder's room, ready to call for help if necessary. The guilt was suffocating, a heavy black weight pressing down with each breath. I had gambled with my family's safety for pride and speed. Morning brought relief. Ryder shuffled to the bathroom, flushed, and came down for breakfast with Morgan. Both were perfectly fine. Somehow, miraculously, nothing had happened. The glass hadn't made it into the food, or perhaps there had only been that one shard. I would never know. I made a silent vow. Never again would I let pride or embarrassment push me into a reckless decision. I became meticulous in the kitchen, checking equipment, sanitizing surfaces, never rushing. Mom noticed and praised my care, unaware of the trauma that night had imprinted on me. Even now, I sometimes replay that evening. I think about how close I came to causing irreparable harm, how a split-second decision could have sent my siblings to the hospital. The fear has faded, but the lesson remains burned into memory. Some mistakes you can survive, some you carry forever, and luck is never guaranteed. Finding a safe, affordable apartment in Chicago had been an uphill battle for months before I met the person who would make my life feel like a living nightmare. After graduating in 2016, most of my classmates had scattered across the country chasing big careers and higher salaries. I, however, stayed behind, working at a small boutique electronics store. Every year, the rent crept up a little more, while my paycheck stayed the same, barely enough to cover food and bills. By March 2024, my landlord announced he was selling the small 2-story row house I had been renting for 3 years. 60 days to leave. The thought alone sent my stomach twisting. Every apartment I could find online wanted first and last month, a security deposit, proof of income triple the rent. My savings? About $1,800. My parents lived in rural Ohio on a fixed income. They could not help. Desperation pushed me into looking at shared housing arrangements I would have never considered before. I scrolled through Craigslist late at night after closing shifts, caffeine and exhaustion blurring together, hoping for a place that wouldn't drain what little money I had left. That's when I found it. A 3-bedroom house on Elmwood Street, a modest block lined with old oak trees and weathered sidewalks. One tenant had just moved out, leaving a furnished room for $650 per month, utilities included. The current resident was a guy named Victor Halstead, described in the ad as quiet, clean, and respectful of boundaries. I sent him a message on a Sunday morning and received a reply within 10 minutes, inviting me to see the house that afternoon. The house looked decent from the outside, a single story with faded gray siding, a small fenced backyard, a driveway with cracked concrete. Nothing extravagant, nothing falling apart either. Victor opened the door wearing dark jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. His hair was neatly combed, his handshake firm but polite. He spoke softly, almost deliberately, and I leaned in slightly as he gave me a quick tour. The interior was neat, cabinets aligned, floors clean, no clutter. Victor explained he worked remotely for a logistics company, mostly inputting data and managing spreadsheets. When I asked about a lease or background check, he waved his hand. Landlord doesn't really bother with that. Just need rent on the first, cash or Venmo works. I should have asked more questions. I should have insisted on paperwork. But $650 a month, utilities included, with a move-in date in 2 weeks. I ignored my instincts. I shook his hand and promised to bring my things on the next Friday. The first 2 weeks were normal, almost pleasant. Victor kept to himself, spending long hours in his room with the door shut. In the kitchen or hallway, he would nod politely or ask about my day. I started thinking maybe I'd gotten lucky. My room was small but comfortable, a window looking over the backyard, a lock on the door that actually worked. I bought a small fridge for my room, set up my laptop on a desk Victor had left, and settled into a routine. Work, home, dinner, sleep, repeat. Sometimes late at night, I would hear Victor speaking softly in his room. At first, I assumed phone calls or video games. The walls were thin, and his voice would murmur through them, but I couldn't catch the words. It didn't bother me. I slept with earplugs anyway because of traffic from the main road. Everything seemed normal. I even texted my friend Tessa, telling her I had finally caught a break. But then the first strange incident happened. It was a Thursday night, about 3 weeks after I moved in. I returned home around 11 p.m., exhausted from a closing shift, looking forward to sleep. That's when I noticed the back door. Wide open. Not unlocked, not ajar, but fully pushed out. The screen door rattled slightly in the wind, letting in cool night air and moths that circled the porch light. I called for Victor. Nothing. I checked his room. Closed. Silent. I locked the door, checked the windows, and paused in the kitchen, trying to rationalize. Perhaps I hadn't locked it properly that morning. Maybe the wind pushed it. A few minutes later, Victor appeared from his room, hair tousled as though he had just woken up. His voice was calm. "I've been in here since 7, he said. "I haven't touched the door." I should have left right then. I didn't. From that night onward, small things began to happen. My toothbrush moved. My jacket wasn't where I left it. My wallet appeared on the counter after I had left it on the nightstand. At first, I thought I was imagining things, misplacing items, but it became undeniable. Someone was in my room. Someone had been touching my things. I confronted Victor at dinner one night. He stared blankly for a moment and said, "I haven't gone into your room. That would be a violation of your privacy." The word violation made my chest tighten. Then the late-night talking intensified. What I thought was phone calls or gaming revealed itself to be something else entirely. Victor would speak aloud to no one, sometimes calm, sometimes angry, for hours. One night, I pressed my ear to the wall. Snippets floated through. Being watched. Don't trust. Name repeated over and over. And then the footsteps. Toward my room, stopping, lingering. I held my breath. They receded. My heart pounded. By early June, strangers started showing up. The first was a tall man in a leather jacket, unkempt hair, who Victor introduced as an old friend. The man never spoke to me, just stared. The second was a young woman with bleach blonde hair, arriving late at night and leaving before sunrise. A third, a skinny kid, waited on the porch, smoking until Victor let him inside. A fourth man, older, with a tattooed neck, came multiple times, entering Victor's room with a heavy backpack and leaving with it empty. I never saw money exchanged, never heard plans, but I understood enough. My gut told me this wasn't just a messy living situation. I should have left. But every apartment in Chicago required deposits I couldn't afford, applications I'd be rejected from, studios far beyond my budget. I stayed, hiding my fear, counting the days until I could save enough to escape. I installed a security camera app on an old phone, placed it on a shelf in my room to record motion. I bought a heavy-duty lock and reinforced my bedroom door. I told myself I could endure until I saved enough to leave. Then came the night that shattered my illusion of safety. It began like any other Friday. I came home around 9 p.m., reheated leftovers, and went straight to my room. Around 11 p.m., exhausted, I fell asleep. I woke not to a sound, but a presence. Something primitive in my brain screamed, "You are not alone." My bedroom door stood wide open. The doorstop was on the floor. The heavy-duty lock had been ripped out of the frame, and there, in the dim light, stood Victor. Boxers and an undershirt, arms limp, expressionless, watching. I couldn't move. I called his name. He tilted his head. Then, silently, he retreated down the hall. I never slept that night. I packed my essentials: laptop, passport, medications, documents, a few clothes. I wanted to call the police but feared retaliation. Victor had been reading my messages. He knew my friends, knew my life. At 6 p.m., I returned to Elmwood Street. A red sedan with tinted windows was parked outside, cracked taillight. The front door unlocked. Voices from the kitchen, multiple people, angry, urgent. My heart sank. I tried to grab my bag quietly. Victor appeared at the hall's end, flanked by two men. One had a handgun. His eyes, sharp and focused, locked on me. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "Who have you talked to?" I stammered, promising silence, promising not to interfere. He studied me, then stepped aside, gesturing to my room. I grabbed my bag and left, heart racing, mind screaming. He let me leave but whispered threats I could never forget. He knew my parents' address. He had copied my contacts. And then, as if nothing had happened, he opened the door for me and wished me luck. I never returned. I spent 3 weeks on my friend Tessa's couch until I could afford a proper place with strict background checks, leases, and references. I paid extra gladly. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine who answers Victor's ads now, drawn by cheap rent and a neat house. I hope they're smarter than I was. I hope they get out too. I had always been the type of person who walked fast, not out of habit, but necessity. Growing up in Chicago, you learn quickly that moving with purpose is sometimes the difference between safety and vulnerability. My friends joked I could cross the loop faster than the trains themselves. That September night in 2023, my legs carried me instinctively as I left the small antique bookstore I managed in Ravenswood, a neighborhood I had loved for its tree-lined streets and early 20th century brownstones. It had been a long Tuesday. Shelves had to be restocked, invoices double-checked, and returns processed. By the time I closed, the store was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint creak of the old wooden floorboards. Normally, I would have taken the L home, a quick ride, warm and contained. But the apartment was only 20 minutes away on foot. After 8 hours cooped inside, I needed the night air, the sound of the city breathing around me. The streets were familiar, comforting almost, dotted with small cafes and corner shops that still smelled faintly of fresh bread and roasted coffee beans. Joggers waved as they passed. A couple walked their dog, and I nodded politely at the bartender from the dimly lit tavern near the corner. Everything was normal. Turning onto West Byron Street, the neighborhood thinned out slightly. Brownstones gave way to slightly older apartment complexes and quiet townhomes, their brick facades shadowed under the weak light of the street lamps. That's when I saw him, a man in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, sitting on the edge of a weathered wooden bench near a small community garden. His posture was slightly hunched, his hands fumbling with a small device that glowed faintly in the dim light. He wore a faded navy jacket and khaki trousers. At first, I ignored him, instinctively taking the far side of the sidewalk. "Excuse me, miss," he said softly, almost apologetically. I kept walking. My instincts screamed, "Keep moving. Do not engage." I had been drilled on these rules all my life, but then his voice softened even more, tinged with frustration. "I just need help with this," he said, holding the phone out slightly. "I can't make out the letters. My eyes, they don't work like they used to." Against every instinct, I slowed, feeling that nagging guilt that women often feel in these situations. What if he was genuinely helpless? What if there was an emergency? I stopped about 8 feet away, careful to keep what I thought was a safe distance. "What do you need?" I asked. The words left my mouth before I could think better of them. His face brightened with relief. He had weathered features, sun-beaten lines, and gray hair peeking out from beneath a faded baseball cap. "This thing keeps asking for a verification code," he said, voice now tinged with exasperation. "I can't read it. Everything is made for people half my age." I took a few careful steps closer, leaning slightly to see the screen without entering his personal space. "There should be a text message with a number. It's probably here," I said, pointing at a green bubble on the screen. He fumbled with the phone, tapping at the wrong app twice before finally opening the messages. Everything was painfully slow, the way it always is when helping someone older navigate technology. My unease grew with each second, but I kept my voice calm, professional. Then I noticed it. Another figure, tall, still, emerging from the shadows of a narrow alley that ran between two brownstones. A young woman, early 20s maybe, in a dark hoodie pulled tight over her head, jeans blending into the night. She didn't acknowledge the man on the bench. She was watching me, studying me. Every instinct I had screamed danger, but I had already stopped walking, already slowed, already allowed myself to be distracted. The man on the bench stood slowly, abandoning the helpless guys. The casual, fumbling grandfather act vanished. He tucked the phone into his jacket pocket, and his posture straightened, revealing broad shoulders and a presence that made my stomach tighten. His eyes locked onto mine, flat, calculating, precise. "You shouldn't be walking alone this late," he said, and the voice was no longer uncertain. It was steady, deliberate, commanding. The woman took a measured step toward me. I was in a triangle, trapped, the bench behind me, her in front, the faint hedge of the community garden cutting off lateral escape. Time slowed. Every self-defense class, every warning I'd ever received about trusting my instincts, every story I'd read about people like me being targeted, converged in that moment. They moved deliberately, purposefully, knowing the patterns of panic and fear. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My legs carried me instinctively, diving into the thick hedge at the edge of the garden. Thorns tore at my jacket and scratched my arms, but I pushed through, adrenaline surging in every vein. Something, an arm or perhaps just a branch, grabbed at my ankle, and I kicked backward, scrambling blindly. Emerging on the far side, I fell to the dirt of the garden, surrounded by raised beds and skeletal tomato cages. I ran between them, knocking over a wheelbarrow that clattered loudly into the night. Behind me, I heard them push through the hedge more slowly, hesitant in the open space. I spotted the chain-link fence at the far edge, climbed with trembling hands, palms bleeding from the wire, and dropped onto Addison Avenue. Headlights from an approaching car illuminated the street. I ran directly into the street, waving my arms frantically. The car stopped abruptly. A middle-aged woman, wide-eyed and clearly startled, stared at me. "Please," I gasped. "Call 911. They're chasing me." She did without hesitation, unlocking the doors as I dove inside, heart hammering, chest heaving, face bleeding. I watched the garden through the windshield. The two figures had disappeared. vanished into the shadows from which they had emerged, swallowed by the same darkness that had almost ensnared me. Police arrived in minutes. I gave my statement, shaking, bloodied, and wrapped in a blanket. I described every detail: the man's green jacket, baseball cap, broad shoulders, the woman's hoodie, sharp cheekbones, and expressionless stare. The officers nodded gravely, confirming that I had narrowly escaped a coordinated pattern they had been tracking in the area. Previous victims had not been so lucky. I moved neighborhoods, broke my lease without complaint, and paid the penalty. The lessons burned themselves into my memory. Never stop walking. Never trust guilt to override instinct. And always, always trust that first, primal warning when something feels wrong. Even now, months later, I take ride shares, even for short distances. I can still picture that street, the man, the woman, the cold precision of their coordination. And I know they are still out there, waiting for the next mistake, the next person distracted by guilt or kindness. Every time I close my eyes at night, I remember the triangle, the hedge, the bench, and the terrible clarity of what true danger feels like when it has your full attention. And I wonder if the next person will make the same mistake I almost did.